Hey everybody, hope all is well. So we're continuing the Indisputable book series. We've been going through many different types of proofs of how you know that Judaism is true, how you know the Torah could have never been made up by people, by a human. It can only have been given by the Creator of the universe. Thus proving Judaism. We just finished the group revelation proof. Now we're on in the third edition of the book. We're on archaeology, page 70. So let's begin. So, another powerful way to know with certainty that Judaism is legitimate is by examining the many remarkable archaeological discoveries over the past centuries that confirm the biblical narratives. These findings have been carbon dated by scientists and are as old as the events in the Torah. So basically, what is this whole section on? The best proof of Judaism and the Torah being true is what I say is, archaeological evidence. You can't get better than that. If there's evidence showing that, for example, Adam and Eve happened, or Noah, or the Jews were in Egypt, right? Like, what greater proof is that than that, these events were true and that these events happened, yeah? So we're going, through the archaeological evidence. The first archaeological proof that we're going to bring is, the proof of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So let's read it in. And if you look in the book, you'll see a picture of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So let's start. So the Epic of Gilgamesh is a lengthy poem written on the tablets that date back to the times of ancient Mesopotamia. It is regarded as one of the earliest great works of literature and is one of the oldest written poems in the world. It was discovered in an ancient library in a place called Nineveh, which today is north of Iraq, in the year 1853 by Austin Henry Layard and his assistant Hormazd Rassam. Today, the tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh can be found in Sulaymaniyah, I think that's Sulaymaniyah, Museum in Iraq. Okay, so archaeologists have dated the Epic of Gilgamesh to about 2100 BCE, which is about the same time the Jewish Bible says, right? The Torah says the flood of Noah occurred about 2105 BCE. So again, dated to this whole Epic of Gilgamesh is dated to around the same time. The Epic of Gilgamesh has many similarities to both the biblical story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and the worldwide flood of Noah. So let's first compare the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Adam and Eve. So again, why would this be a proof for Adam and Eve? Because again, if you see in history, Adam and Eve was not just a Jewish, that's not just Jewish history, that's world history. So if you see that there's other, societies acknowledging that Adam and Eve existed, right, in the whole story, so you see many people are talking about it, and you see that's evidence for it. But we'll get more into that. So let's see how Epic of Gilgamesh basically, parallels the biblical account of Adam and Eve. So in both documents, a man is created from the earth, right, from the dirt of the ground by God, right, Genesis chapter 2 verse 7, and lives in a natural setting amongst the animals, Genesis chapter 2 verse 19. In both accounts, the place where they lived is called Edin, right? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it calls it Edin, right? He's introduced to a woman, right, who attempts him to eat a special plant. In both stories, the man accepts food from the woman, Genesis 3. I'm not going to read the verses. You can just look into the book. So in both stories, the man accepts the food from the woman, covers his nakedness, and must leave his formal realm, Edin, unable to return. Last we see in both accounts, there was a deceiving snake. Again, you can't get more spot on than that. It's like whoever wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh looked at the Bible, right? Now, I'm going to explain, by the way, if the Epic of Gilgamesh was actually written before the Bible. Maybe the Bible copied it. So maybe the Torah copied the story. So we'll see. We'll get into that, why that's not the case. Okay? So now, when the biblical account of the story of Noah is compared to the poem of the Epic of Gilgamesh, we also find many similarities. So in both accounts, civilization becomes very corrupt and sinful. This prompted God to bring a massive flood to the entire world. Additionally, in both accounts, God then chose the only righteous man in the world to build an ark for him and his family to ensure the survival of the human race. In addition, in both the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Bible, God commands the righteous person to gather a sample of each and every animal species to ensure their survival. Also, in both accounts, birds, dove, and raven were used after the storm of the floods. After the storm of the flood ceased, to determine whether the flood waters had subsided, to see if there was dry land. In both situations, after the water subsided, a huge boat came to rest on a mountain, and sacrifices were offered uh, afterward to God, in which God was pleased, and God gave blessings. Also, it says in both accounts that God says He will never destroy the world again. So, again, if you look at Gilgamesh and Genesis, the extent of the flood, both were global. What was the cause? Man sins. Who was it intended to? All mankind, right? Who is the sender? Basically God, right? Similarity after similar, so many similarities. If you want to see there's a graph in the book right here for people who want to see the graph that talks about it. If you want a free PDF of the book, go to indisputabletruth.com. You can get a free PDF and you could see this. But just showing you the side by side, the shape of the boat was both similar. The windows, the amount of windows, the amount of doors, compartments inside, the height of the boat. Did the hero complain? The order to build a boat, means of announcement, the hero's character, the human passengers, other passengers, means of the flood, duration of the flood, test to find land, types of birds, ark landing spots, sacrifice after flood, blessed after flood, right? All these things, just similarity after similarity that we see. So, Professor Andrew R. George from the University of London says that the Genesis flood narrative parallels the Epic of Gilgamesh so closely that it leaves no doubt that they descended from the same source. Okay? The most likely assumption, so this is him, the most likely assumption, this is Wexler, Robert Wexler, in his Ancient Near Eastern Mythology and Epic of Gilgamesh. He basically says the most likely assumption we can make is that both Genesis and Gilgamesh drew their material from a common tradition about the flood that existed. These stories then diverged in the retelling, meaning that you have two stories. They're very, very similar. Obviously, not exactly the same. There's a few details, just name changes and whatever. But the idea is, they're both descend from the same, from the same source. It's just one of the tradition, kind of like when obviously probably the Epic of Gilgamesh, again based off our assumption that the Torah is from God. The Epic of Gilgamesh, since it was also other writings included with it. So the person, let's say the person who wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh, right, lived, he obviously lived after the time of Noah. So, when he heard these stories, imagine him just hearing these stories about his ancestors, about a flood, about Adam and Eve, right? So for him, it was kind of like, mystical stories that happened in the past, of, stories of creation that, that they hear, like legends and myths, right? According, that's probably how the Epic of Gilgamesh, that was from his perspective. But obviously from our perspective, from the Torah perspective, no, these events actually happen and there's evidence. But that's why there's kind of a little bit of a divergence in the retelling. But again, 95% of the story is exactly the same. So we see through all these examples that the Epic of Gilgamesh contains very strong evidence that the stories of Adam and Eve and Noah's flood are true, as the stories are almost identical. Now, the big question is, how do we know that the Torah didn't copy these stories from the Epic of Gilgamesh? Even though the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the Jewish Bible, this does not contradict the fact that the Torah is divine. As the Torah clearly says itself that these events took place before the Jewish Bible, before the Torah was written. It is not like the Torah claimed that the event of Adam and Eve and Noah and the flood of Noah were exclusively Jewish historical events. These events involved all of mankind. Thus, it is logical that many cultures would have documented it in their history. It is highly likely that Adam, Eve, and Noah passed these stories down orally to their descendants. Eventually, as time went by, one of them wrote it. Eventually, as time went by, one of them wrote it down as these tablets, and later Moses wrote it down by the word of God in the Torah. So, meaning repeating that. Eventually, as time went by, one of them wrote it down as these tablets. So the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of his descendants. But again, Moses, who's also descendant. Obviously, we're all descendants of Adam, Eve, and Noah. But Moses wrote it down by the word of God. So two people are telling the stories. One heard it as a tradition passed down generation to generation. Okay, and one heard it as from the creator of the universe. Hey, God created the world. I know what happened. This is exactly the story. This is what happened. This is the reason. These are the lessons to learn. Fine. Now, moreover, the story of the flood in particular is discussed in many different ancient cultures, such as the Chinese, the Hindu, the Greeks, the Sumerians, etc. And I'm going to list you a bunch of, civilizations that had that had a flood tradition. India, Persia, Australia, Greece, the kingdom of Phrygia, I don't know what that is, Germany, Ireland, Choctaw tribe, Hopi tribe, Caddo tribe, Mixmac tribe, Mexico, Aztecs, Mayans, Incans, Indonesia, Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Africa, etc. All these nations had a flood tradition. Now, I have a question. Did these people ever meet each other? Where do these, one guy lives in North America, one guy lives in Asia, one guy lives in Europe, one guy lives in Australia. How the heck did all these people literally have a tradition of a flood that happened? Like, how did they know? They were all there when it happened, right? They live oceans apart from each other. All of a sudden, one day, everyone in history decides, yes, let's make an ancient flood tradition and let's basically tell the whole story, right? The same. Like, they never met each other. How do they all know? They didn't communicate. They didn't have WhatsApp and Instagram and YouTube to know what was going on. It is quite interesting that the Chinese people call the person who started humanity after the flood by the name of Noah. What does that sound like? Noah. Noah. The Chinese people called Noah Noah. So everybody has the same tradition. This is world history here, right? This is world history, and everyone recorded their perspective. Obviously, they because it was passed down orally, and it wasn't like important information that's life or death. It was just stories, and for them, it became traditions and kind of legends. But for us, because God told us, yeah, those events actually happened, so we have actually the real account of what actually went down and the real reason of everything. So we have like the most accurate account of the historical, of the history. So, but it's funny again that everyone has that tradition. So the Chinese, they call him Noah. This sounds very similar to Noah. The strange thing is that nearly all these ancient cultures have a very similar story, despite the thousands of miles of mountains, deserts, and even oceans that separate these civilizations. Additionally, many of these stories were told before was even an exchange between these civilizations. Therefore, it seems that the Epic of Gilgamesh and the other ancient flood stories confirm the biblical account of Adam and Eve and the great flood of Noah. So if you look in the book on page 73, there's actually a whole graph taken from the book Coming Revolution by Rabbi Zamir Cohen. This is kind of a whatever. And this shows, all the places that had a flood tradition. You see all the countries, Russia, Europe, North America, Africa, all the places with the little books there. These are all places that had a flood tradition, right? Unbelievable. Oceans across, everyone at one, everyone's making something up, it kind of gets ridiculous to, start saying things like that. Okay, fine. So that's the archaeological evidence for Adam and Eve and Noah. And it's funny, this is, the past, 2 or 3 weeks Parsha, right? We're in Bereshit, we're in Noach. Now we're in the, in Lech Lecha, now we're in Va'era. Fine. So now let's go to the next. How much time do we have? Okay, we have 10 more minutes. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so evidence for the exodus of Egypt. Now we're getting to the big guns here. Okay, and I don't know if we're gonna finish this. Let's see how much we could cover. So evidence for the exodus of Egypt. The belief in the nation of Israel's amazing exit from Egypt through the 10 plagues after a long period of slavery, the splitting of the sea, and the revelation at Mount Sinai are all fundamental principles in the Jewish faith. For this reason, many of the commandments of the Torah refer to the remembrance of the exodus of Egypt, right? Like Shabbat, Shabbat, when we say Kiddush, Tefillin, right? It talks about exodus of Egypt. Mezuzah talks about exodus of Egypt, right? Passover, so many commandments, they all, go back to Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, a remembrance of the exodus of Egypt, that the Jews left Egypt 3,300 years ago. For thousands of years, this event has never been doubted and has been accepted universally. However, in recent years, some have been asking, if the Jews really were in Egypt, why is there no archaeological evidence for the existence of such people? People making claim there's no archaeological evidence. So before we begin, we have to understand an important idea. When nations would record history in ancient times, they did so to make their nation look good, rather than to record actual facts. Meaning what? If they lost a war, they would not record it in order to preserve their honor, right? So if Egypt lost a war, they're not going to record it. Hey, we lost a war to the Hittites. No, you are not going to write that down in your history books, especially if you're the one. It's not like nowadays where the history books are written by other people and they're not biased. Usually most history books are not biased. They're written by for example, I forgot the person who wrote. There's a Roman or Greek who wrote all the ancient Egyptian history or whatever. The idea is when he wrote it, there's no bias. Okay, he's writing about Egyptian history, yeah. But the people, if I'm the Egyptian king and I'm not going to write, I lost the battle. I'm not going to write that, we got destroyed and we got wiped out and they killed us. You're never going to do that. So, right, to preserve their honor, it doesn't look good. On the other hand, if they were victorious, it would be recorded with glamour and praise. Sometimes the victory would be even exaggerated. So people ask, if the exodus of Egypt really did occur, why don't we see any reference to it in ancient Egyptian literature? So, as we explained, it's because the Egyptians suffered a heavy loss, and therefore writing about this event would have been humiliating. For example, there was a war between the Egyptians and the Hittites called the Battle of Kadesh. We know that in a war, there is usually one winner. Yet in both of their recordings of history, they each claim to have been victorious. How is it that both claim to have won this war? The answer is that they both claim to have won from their own perspectives. Since bias is so common in recording history, you don't expect to find negative details about a nation in the recorded history. In other words, the reason you do not see the exodus of the Hebrews in ancient Egyptian history is because the Hebrews, right, the Jews, were victorious over the Egyptians. The Egyptians obviously did not record this major loss in their history, or if they did record it, they made it seem like they actually won. Just looking at the footnote, right? So in the upcoming section, we'll provide compelling evidence for the events that led up to the Exodus, the miracles of that led up to the Exodus, the miracles of the Exodus, and the Exodus itself. Let's begin, right? But another point I kind of want to add. This is just a rule in anything. Absence of evidence is not a proof of anything. If I go in a room, or let's say archaeology, right? If I don't find archaeological evidence for something, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Like when you're when, for example, in Israel, when they're digging, there's a lot of land, there's a lot of area to cover. If you dig up 5% and you didn't find anything in that 5% of land you digged up, doesn't mean what you're looking for doesn't exist, right? I forgot the word for it, but it's absence of evidence is not proof. I don't know the word, but there was like a saying for it. The idea is, so we can't just make a judgment based off of not seeing evidence whether something happened or not, right? But evidence is a good indicator. And I don't know why, but I've seen many rabbis claim, there's no, not rabbis, but people claim, there's no exit, so there's no evidence for the exit of Egypt, whatever. So, I looked into it and I myself saw so many things online and so many videos and so many articles and, videos and movies just on this topic of, the Jews being in Egypt. So it's kind of strange why people are saying that. I guess, there's, whatever people, want to believe whatever they want to believe in. But let's go into the evidence. This, indisputable truth brings crazy evidence for, for the Jews leaving Egypt. So let's go into that. How much time do we have? Okay, we have 5 minutes. Let's go. So the Ipuwer papyrus. Okay, a papyrus is a type of paper that was used in ancient Egypt. So just have that in mind. So the Ipuwer papyrus is a papyrus, right? So ancient Egyptian paper, it's like a scroll found in Egypt that dates back to the 19th dynasty of Egyptian history, about 1300 BCE. The 10 plagues, according to the Torah, the Jewish Bible, occurred in 1313 BCE. The papyrus, which was taken to the Edin Museum in Holland, describes violent upheavals in Egypt. By the way, this is a picture. If you want to see on the book, page 74, a picture of the papyrus. Okay. So the papyrus, which was taken to the Edin Museum in Holland, describes violent upheavals in Egypt, starvation, drought, escape of slaves with the wealth of the Egyptians, and death throughout the land. The papyrus was written by an Egyptian named Ipuwer and appears to be an eyewitness account of the effects of the exodus of Egypt from the perspective of an average Egyptian. Below are experts from the papyrus together with the parallels described in the Torah in the book of Exodus. So there's a whole section here showing the comparison between the verses in the Bible of the exodus of Egypt and the papyrus, showing that the papyrus is actually the greatest proof of the exodus of Egypt, that this event actually happened. And if you combine both of them together, you look at side to side, the book brings it down, one side here and one side there. You'll see it's literally a perfect account, a perfect if there was a video recording, this would be the closest thing to it of the time of the exodus of Egypt. Okay, so let's read it. So I'm gonna go I'm gonna compare verse to verse. So if you read the Ipuwer papyrus, so let's talk about the plague of blood. So it says in the Ipuwer papyrus that plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere. Okay, and now if you read the Torah says, you know what? Let me just read all the the papyrus and then I'll read the Torah. We'll go section by plague. So the papyrus says what? Plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere. The river is blood. Give me a second. I'm thinking. Should I read the Hebrew, the Torah first, or this first? Okay, let's just read the papyrus first. Okay. Plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. The river is blood. As you drink it, you lose your humanity and thirst for water. Men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water, for they could not drink the water of the river. Wow, they can't drink the water of the river. Why? Something happened. Behold, Egypt has fallen to the pouring water, and he who poured water on the ground seizes the might misery. That is our water. That is our happiness. That shall we do in respect thereof. All is in ruin. Right? Everything is to garbage. Everything is gone. We lost our water source. Now that's the Epicure papyrus. Okay. Now let's go to the Torah. We're reading the plague of blood from the Torah's perspective. Again, see how they correspond literally word for word. So the Exodus chapter 7 verse 21 through 24. Okay, these are the verses I'm about to read. And there was blood throughout the land of Egypt. The river stank. Egypt will grow weary of trying to drink water from the river. Okay, that's what the Torah says. And in the Epicure papyrus also says that people were losing their humanity. They were going crazy from not being able to drink water. God said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch forth your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, over the canals, over their ponds, and over all their bodies of water, and they will become blood. And there will be blood throughout the entire land of Egypt, even in wood and stone vessels. Okay? All the rivers of Egypt, all the waters of the rivers were turned to blood, and all the Egyptians dug around the river for water to drink, for they cannot drink the water of the river. So again, you read the Torah, and the Torah is telling you word for word, describe the Epicure papyrus is basically a copy of the Torah. Yeah. Now let's go back to so that's the plague of blood. So we see there, a parallel between the Epicure papyrus and the Torah about the plague of blood. Again, confirmation of that event of the plague of blood. Now let's go to the plague of frogs. So it says in the Epicure papyrus, "Oh, that the earth would cease from the noise and tumult be no more." So when you go to the Torah perspective of the frogs, right, of the frogs, it says in Exodus chapter 8 verse 1 through 11, the Zohar tells us that because of the constant croaking of the frogs, no Egyptian could converse with his fellow, and babies and young children died from the noise. So you see that that Epicure is describing that there's so much noise or whatever, we can't do it anymore. There's so much noise, and the Torah is basically telling us, the frogs are making a lot of noise and whatever. That's the plague of frogs. Now the plague of Dever, pestilence. So what happened? That's the plague where all the animals died. So it says in Epicure papyrus, all animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. Okay. Now, if you read it from the Torah perspective, the plague of Dever, the plague of pestilence, it says the hand of God is given upon thy cattle, which is in the field, and there shall be a very grievous sickness. Okay. So the idea is what the Torah is describing. The idea that about the plague of pestilence. Okay, so now let's go to the plague of hailstones and locusts. So if we read it from the Epicure perspective, okay, it says basically, okay, so I'm reading the verses in Epicure. The plague of hailstones and locusts. Indeed, gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. We know when the plague of hail happened that God mixed hail and water, right? So it's talking about that. It says trees are destroyed. The hail destroyed all the trees, the Torah says. Lower Egypt, so again, I'm reading the Epicure papyrus. Lower Egypt weeps. The entire place is without revenues to belong. By right, wheat and barley, geese and fish. There's no more wheat and barley. Forthus, no fruits or herbs are found. Like, oh my gosh, forthus means like OMG. We don't have fruits. We don't have anything. Like, it's kind of saying like, ugh, right? Indeed, grain has perished on every side. So that's the Epicure. Now let's read the Torah. And fire, okay, the Torah says, and the fire ran along the ground. There was a hail, and fire mingled with the hail. Very grievous. So we say what? The Torah said this hail destroyed, walls, destroyed houses, gates, right? There was a fire attached to it. Then it says the hail smote every herb of the field and broke every tree of the field. So the Epicure papyrus says all the trees were destroyed. Okay. It says and the flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was in season and the flax was ripe, but the wheat and the rye were not smitten. Why? For they were not grown up. So the barley, we know in agriculture that barley sprouts much faster than wheat and rye. So if you read the thing, it says the wheat, the barley, right, all that stuff, got destroyed. So that's with the plague of hailstones and locusts. We also said, so the hailstones destroyed the I think there's more. Oh, sorry. Yeah. There's more to the hail and locust. The hailstones actually destroyed the wheat and it's destroyed the barley. But what destroyed the wheat? Because the plagues were not all like in one shot. The locust happened. The plague of locusts is where all the barley, all the wheat got destroyed because the wheat grew after the barley. Okay, and so let's continue reading the verses. So going back to Ipur, indeed has perished which was yesterday seen. The land is left over its weariness like the cutting of flax. Meaning, it's like they had harvest season. Everything is gone, but no one harvested. All the hail destroyed it. Behold, cattle are left to stray, and there is none to gather them together. Now, if you read the Torah says there remain no green thing in the trees or herbs in the fields throughout all the land of Egypt. Basically, the hailstones and the locust, the hailstones destroyed everything, and the locust ate everything up. And it says in the Torah, gather thy cattle and all that hast in the field. So the Torah is saying, the Torah is saying that that the Egyptians were gathering their cattle, right? And it says, and he who did not fear the word of God left his servants and cattle in the field. Meaning, God basically, before the warning of the hailstones, there was a warning, guys, gather everything, bring everything inside, it's going to get destroyed. But it says here in Ipur that no one listened. It says in the Torah no one listened, and it says in Ipur people left their cattle. They didn't care. No one gathered them. No one brought them in. Okay, fine. We're almost done here. Let's go to, the plague of darkness. Okay, the plague of darkness. It says, in Ipur, the land is in darkness. You read the Torah says, and there was a thick darkness in the land of Egypt. Okay, the plague of the firstborns, next plague. Indeed, the children of princes, the princes are the heads, right, are dashed against the walls, meaning they killed, the babies are dying, right? The children of princes, the firstborn. Indeed, the children of princes are cast out into the streets, okay? Meaning the firstborns. The prison is ruined. He who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. It is groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentations, crying. A man looked upon his son as an enemy. I have to explain what that means. So the plague of the firstborns. And it came to pass, I'm reading the Torah. And it came to pass that at midnight, the Lord smote all the firstborns in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive that was in prison. Okay? So again, it's for the people in the camera. I know this is backwards, but we're reading it from here. The comparisons, it's much better to look inside yourself so you can see in the book. We're on page 76. So it says that all the firstborn died. So it says here the children of princes, even from the house of Pharaoh, right? It says even from the firstborn who is the captive in prison, right? And if you read, the Ipur, it says the prison, also got affected. There was not one house where there was not one dead. Okay, and it says in Ipur, he who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. Then it says in the Torah there was a great cry in Egypt. And if you read Ipur, it says there was groaning and crying mingled throughout the land. There's lamentations, crying everywhere. And it says a man looks upon his son as the enemy. So what does that mean in Ipur? So the Midrash of Psalm says that after being warned of the coming plague, the firstborns went to their fathers and to Pharaoh to urge them to let the Israelites go, but they refused. Consequently, the firstborns turned against their fathers, killing them by the sword. This is why Psalm 136 tells us, give thanks to God who smote the Egyptians with their firstborn. Why? Because God used the Egyptians to kill their parents because they didn't want to let the Jews go. So the Egyptian kids said, guys, we're going to die. Let's rebel against our parents. And that's why it says in Ipur, a man looks upon his son as an enemy. Now we understand what Ipur is saying. Why? Because he saw his son is trying to kill him because, they don't want to let the Jews go. Now this is one of the next two are nuts. Okay. It says in Ipur, when the Jews were leaving the Exodus, right? When the Israelites take the Egyptian wealth, Ipur says basically gold, lapis lazuli, right? Silver, malachite, carnelian, and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves. Behold, the poor of the land have become rich, and the possessor of property has become one who has nothing. And it says when the Jews left Egypt in Exodus chapter 3, verse 22, each female Israelite slave shall request from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver, gold, and clothing, and you shall put these on your sons and daughters, and you shall empty out Egypt of its wealth. So we see what Ipur is describing, how the Jews emptied out Egypt of its wealth, how the female slaves took everything, how the poor slaves became rich. They emptied Egypt of its wealth, like as the Torah said. Okay, we're almost done with this. And Ipur writes, forsooth, poor men have become the owner of good things. Poor people became rich. He who cannot make his own sandals is now the possessor of riches. And it says here in the Torah, and they requested from the Egyptians silver and gold articles and clothing. And God made the Egyptians favor them, and they granted their request. The Israelites thus drained Egypt of its wealth. Okay, and the next one, the clouds of glory. We knew when the Jews left Egypt, there was a cloud of glory, a pillar of cloud that led them, was GPS navigation, air conditioning, it was a fire at night to lead them at night. It was a cloud by day, giving them, guidance. So Ipiwer saw this cloud, and Ipiwer said, "Behold, the fire has mounted up on high. Its burning goes forth the enemies of the land." Okay, and it says here in Exodus chapter 13 verse 21, it by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. These miraculous clouds protected the Israelites from their surrounding enemies, as well as provided them with shelter from all negative elements associated with living in a desert, such as such as the hot desert sun, whatever. So the idea was that Ipiwer saw, this Egyptian saw that when the Jews were leaving Egypt, he saw, how this pillar of fire was leading them across the way. So let's finish off with this. After comparing the words of the Ipiwer papyrus to the Jewish Bible, we see that they are extremely similar. It looks like two people describing the same events from different perspectives, the Egyptian perspective and the Israelite perspective. To conclude, this papyrus, which dates back to the same period the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, provides us with compelling evidence that confirms the events of the 10 plagues and the Exodus. Okay, next time we're going to continue on the more evidence for the Jews being in Egypt, but let's just just discuss that for a minute. Guys, you can't get more clear evidence than that. If someone says, yeah, these events never happened, where's the archaeological evidence? That's the evidence right there. The Ipiwer papyrus is literally an Egyptian describing the 10 plagues. You compare it to the Torah, it's literally the same exact event, accounting for it just from their perspective. So the idea is what? The idea is we see from here what? Evidence that the Torah is true, that human beings did not make the Torah up like some people claim, that the Exodus did happen. And so I want to leave it off with that. Thank you so much for listening. For whoever's listening, please subscribe to get more videos, to help grow the channel. Please, share these videos, get them across. I think every Jew needs to know this information. And thank you for listening. Let's finish there.